Thanks. Good morning, everyone. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak. It's a great venue, actually. It's very exciting. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the research that we're doing in Birmingham around one of the perhaps most topical issues at the moment, which is concussion. I think it's almost in sport, it's almost impossible to read a paper on a Sunday reminder without reading something about someone who's been concussed and perhaps being mismanaged. It's a growing problem, and traumatic brain injury in general is a growing problem. It's becoming the leading cause of death and disability worldwide, according to the WHO, in terms of disease burden. But actually, in terms of just sport, if you want, traumatic brain injury accounts for 10% of all injuries. What is actually alarming is that the rate of concussion keeps going up and up and up and up. And there are a number of reasons why this is. Some positive, some negative. Some people say maybe this is because for example, in rugby, the players becoming a little bit more physical. The players certainly are becoming bigger. The average rugby player has gone up a stone in the last 10 years. This is something to do with it, but it's possibly also because of increasing awareness, which is a good thing. So the concussions are being reported with increasing frequency. And certainly, if you look at these stats from the RFU, it's the green line. I haven't got a pointer, but it keeps going up almost year on year. And now rugby has become the second most dangerous human activity in terms of concussion, apart from after amateur horse riding. And it's also a problem in the military. Traumatic brain injury was the signature of the wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and we're still seeing, despite not being in conflicts at the moment, so the QE is obviously a military hospital, we still see a large number of soldiers being concussed in training or sort of during sort of military exercises around the world. Concussion has been dubbed as one of the most difficult diagnoses to make in medicine. We can probably all see why. It's a very difficult diagnosis to spot, if you want. If you're a club doctor, it's a split-second event, and often it's in the middle of a scrum or a sort of a heated action, if you want. It's very difficult to see whether a player is actually being concussed, particularly from the dugouts where the sport doctors are. They have to cover sort of quite a wide area visually, and although they have video feeds or video replays at the moment, so they only take in from certain angles. But also the problem with concussion is it can manifest itself in a number of different ways, and often somebody who's being concussed actually can look fine immediately after the event, and then the pathology really evolves over hours or days. And it's the typical experience of someone who's being concussed after they maybe come round briefly, after brief loss of consciousness, and actually they feel absolutely fine. And then in the evening they start getting a headache, they start getting dizziness, and they start getting fogginess. But this takes hours, so actually it'd be really difficult to diagnose that at the time of injury. And I'm just going to give you an example which has been in the media.
He's an outstanding carrier, and he just bought time there. He had 3 or 4 men on him.
This is George North, for people that follow rugby.
A full ball to kick off.
North needs to be careful, and so does Thompson. And Burrell comes in and makes it clear what he thinks, as does JJ Hanrahan. Now George North, with a history of head injuries, has landed. He's landed on his head, then Thompson's gone.
Yeah, it's all outcome related these days. Here we go, we're going to get the slow-mo. So the ball comes up, and as he lands, he's taken a heavy knock on the side, it looks like, at this stage.
Okay, so I'm happy with looking done there, if that's okay, Trev.
Okay.
I'm happy with that, yeah.
Okay, so what I have is a player who's played the man in the air and he's landed.
So the reason I'm bringing this up, Matt will be pleased me saying, is George North is probably one of the most famous rugby players, and he's also famous for the number of concussions that he has suffered. And the reason I brought this up, I could have brought up a number of different episodes, is because this was missed and caused a huge furore in the press. And this was missed because from the video feed that the doctors had, actually this concussion wasn't clear. It was only visible on the BT Sport footage. From there, it's actually nobody in this room would doubt that he was concussed. But I say it was actually cleared, and he returned to play, and then he was stopped subsequently, sort of in the following day. So actually completed the match, which is against all rules. If you're being concussed, you need to come off and not return to play on the day of the match, and actually need to you're not able to play for at least a week. So the media are really scrutinising this to a great extent. These are all examples from the football World Cup in Brazil. There were 5 concussions. Players were clearly out cold on the pitch, and they were actually all allowed to return to play immediately. And actually, there was no one actually got stopped even afterwards. And again, there are several examples in rugby. So that actually was part of what's driving this is the legal cases behind this. There's a lawsuit in the States that's still ongoing. There's close to $1 billion awarded to retired NFL players who have been left with some issues that have been attributed to repeated concussions. And this is open-ended. So actually, this is just initial award. There have been cases brought up against FIFA as well. They so far haven't been very successful, but this hasn't completely gone away. Obviously, things are serious when Will Smith does a film about it. It's quite a good film. So why people are worried about it? The people are worried about various things, and actually this often get conflated in the media. But one thing is the early damage, the acute management of concussion. But the other issue is the second impact syndrome, and this is quite the boy there is quite a tragic example. It's somebody who's had 3 concussions during the same match, and on the third occasion he collapsed and never woke up, and unfortunately died. And this is because of the it's called second impact syndrome. Means if you've been concussed repeatedly and you haven't recovered from the first one, the brain can swell up. And this actually happens particularly in very young players. He was only 14, unfortunately. The other one is somebody that people might recognize is Jeff Fastel, who's one of the best headers in the game. He also died from a condition called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which happens allegedly through a repeater. It was described as a dementia pugilistica, so it happens as a boxer's disease of being concussed numerous times. And he's the first case in the UK, in the first footballer, to be recognised by the coroner as having died from an industrial disease. So his occupation was linked, as a footballer, heading the ball, was linked to his death from a neurodegenerative condition. So obviously this has made legal history as well. We still don't know what concussion does acutely. We don't know what causes what the mechanisms are. This is very difficult to study in the lab or clearly in humans. We think if you just stretch a nerve, if you stretch an axon, you'll get the axon to depolarize. So actually you get an electrical chemical change that will lead to the release of other chemicals, neurotransmitters, that actually cause that immediate, if you want, other loss of consciousness or disorientation. But this is just a split-second phenomenon. So what happens afterwards is another story. And we know if the injury is severe enough, that can cause inflammation in the brain. It can cause neuroinflammation. These inflammatory cells that congregate in axon that has been stretched, the nerve cell has been stretched. And there is a study from Imperial that shows that these changes can be detected after a single mild traumatic brain injury up to 16 years after the initial event. So if you look hard enough, you'll actually find inflammation in the brain after a single concussion for many years. Then there's a whole kind of worms or neurodegeneration. Does it happen? Does it not? Clearly, there are a number of reported cases now. I think there were fewer and far between to begin with, but now these have become very numerous. And actually, they've been reported not just in American football players, but also in soccer players, if you want, and all sorts of other sports. This is actually the first, one of the first few players to be diagnosed with chronic traumatic encephalopathy. So what is the evidence around that? We know if you've been concussed numerous times, it may take just as few as 3. There's beginning in some people, not in everyone. We know some people are very resilient to that. There'll be some evidence of cognitive decline. You may get concussed more and more as you increase your dose of concussions. But there's clearly a lot of inter-individual variability. But certainly the authorities are taking very seriously, and there are a number of calls out there now from the RFU and the football associations to look at neurodegeneration in football, including headers in footballers. So what is the evidence? We've got some evidence from animal studies that sort of some level of neurodegeneration can occur. I would actually, and I often say this, I mean, clearly there is no epidemiological evidence. Even though a number of people play rugby and football, we're not seeing an epidemic of neurodegenerative conditions in people who have retired from the sport. But clearly, these are not so few that you can ignore it. Clearly, there are people that are affected by this, but there is a selection bias in many of the studies. The people that volunteer to donate their brain are people that clearly have issues that are manifest to them or their families. But there are other factors that can explain the pathology. But also one thing that is really important to emphasize at all levels, there are huge benefits from sports. And one of the most protective factors against dementia is actually having a very active life. This is one of the things that we we know for definite. So sportsmen actually will probably more exposed, contact sports might be more exposed to death from neurodegenerative conditions, but actually tend to live longer than the rest of us in general. And it's also protective against Alzheimer's disease and dementia in general. But as a response to all of this, I think all the guidance, if you want, from various authorities being tightened up. They've all issued online modules, and we've contributed to Birmingham to virtually all of these. How to recognize a concussion, how to remove a player, and when to return a player. So what's the difficulty with this? The difficulty with this is actually these are all based on some very loose symptoms that the player needs to volunteer. So if you don't get cooperation from the player, it becomes very difficult. There are also some pitch side memory tests that the players have to do, quick orientation tests if you want. Again, the players really learn how to do this test really quickly. They practice them on the coach, go into a match, learn the words they need to remember, so they recall is actually they tell you the words before you even ask them, which is interesting. So actually you need to have some level of cooperation, and none of this is terribly objective, and this is one of the problems that all the sports have at the moment. And so the work that has been done so far has been shown that these really have very limited diagnostic power. They're good, but they're not good enough. And actually, the other consideration, if you look at symptoms, the player may be entirely honest about his or her symptoms, but the fact is players that have a lot of symptoms anyway, a lot of them come with symptoms of stress, anxiety, pain, they've had a number of injuries, and even children actually are not immune from this. Actually, when you look at compare this test between volunteers and people being concussed, it's very often difficult to spot a difference. Still, for this reason, there's been quite a lot of interest in traumatic brain injury biomarkers, and the number of publications keeps going up exponentially to trying to help with the diagnosis of concussion. As I say, this is one of the most difficult to make in medicine. And people have been looking for a very long time of products that are released from nerve cells that may have been damaged. So you're looking for particularly for proteins that leached out into the bloodstream and can be detected either in the lab or with point-of-care devices. The problem with these are in concussion, you actually don't get an awful lot of these proteins circulating around because actually these are released from damaged cells. The numbers either cells actually die is very, very small in a mild traumatic brain injury. You get damage, but not cell death. So actually, they're very, very little of these compounds going around. And also, these take a very long time to filter through to the bloodstream. So actually, when you're trying to measure these compounds, usually several hours after the event. So actually not particularly useful for any kind of pitch side tests at the moment. So what are we doing in Birmingham? We're working with something. I've been working in traumatic brain injury biomarkers for about 20 years, but a few years ago, we started looking at microRNAs. This is a very different beast, if you want. These are not proteins. These are fragments of RNA that are very small fragments of RNA that are produced by cells and circulate around all the time. And for a long time, they were thought to be cellular debris, debris floating around. But actually, they're not. They have very important functions. And what they do, they tend to silence genes that don't need to be expressed, don't need to be activated at a particular time. They just patrol the body all the time. They're produced by every fluid, by every tissue, and they appear in every body. And they're having a lot of literature, if you want, coming from oncology because they're thought to either activate metastases or cause tumors to spread or cause a response that may stop the tumor spreading. People are looking at ways to manipulate them. But what is interesting from our point of view, actually they are produced and released immediately after an injury. They're there anyway, but they get released, so they get uptaken by cells instantly after an injury. And this is how they work. So we get the DNA is read out all the time. It produces mRNA. So obviously going back to biology a bit, but then say Adam, I don't know, it's called Adam here, it gets concussed. And there's a signal. We still don't know what that signal is. It causes these microRNAs to be activated. And it happens within seconds, probably through a neurological mechanism, maybe the parasympathetic system. And what happens is these microRNAs, they come out of the cell, sort of wrapped in a double lipid membrane. They circulate, they float around, and then what they do, they just then the membrane fuses with a distant cell. They're actually messengers that help the cells communicate with each other. They fuse with a distant cell, and then they release their content into the other cell. This is playing a little bit more slowly than in my version, but anyway. And actually what we found is, this is a study from road traffic accidents where the paramedics were taking blood samples immediately after an injury, so literally within 10-15 minutes of an injury. We found that these microRNAs were 100% diagnostic of a mild traumatic brain injury or a severe traumatic brain injury. 100% has never been seen before. This is exceptional. And this happens within minutes, so 10-15 minutes, where all the other biomarkers take hours. This has been quite an important discovery. So the RFU said, oh, this is phenomenally interesting, but we're not going to get our players to give blood on the pitch side, which is understandable. So we've started looking at saliva biomarkers instead. So these saliva macroRNAs, if you want. Other people in the world looking at salivary macroRNAs, and other people have found that actually they can help with diagnosis. For example, children in this study, they might have prolonged symptoms after a concussion. So we're not the only group, but certainly this is part of a large concussion study research program that we have in Birmingham, possibly the largest certainly in Europe. Here at the University of Birmingham, we get players mainly from the RFU, but also from all other sports, hockey, football, not many boxers, but yeah, sort of quite a sort of a variety of sports, if you want to, even American football. And we put them through a number of imaging tests and neuropsychology tests and urine sampling and so forth. And from this study, these are just numbers, but we worked out these macroRNAs, these are the ones in bold. Actually, these are 2-3 days after an injury. They can be really useful at confirming that a concussion has actually occurred. Because the players that come to us, it's often unclear whether they're being concussed or not. They refer to us as with a suspicion of concussion. So these macroRNAs are very, very useful at confirming that. But the study that we've added a number of strands. This is part of our collaboration with the Beckman Institute. I know some of you are involved with that. So they're actually looking at the imaging data with us. They have huge expertise. We've introduced other systems. For example, we're developing a balance test that uses virtual reality, a gait analysis we're doing with Oxford Brook University, functional near infrared. This is a £500,000 machine has just been delivered to the University of Birmingham that can do multifocal near-infrared spectroscopy, and we're working with industry, so with a company called BioVici Diagnostics. They're a spin-out of the University of Birmingham to develop a point-of-care device, because it's all very well and good if you have a biomarker that can tell you, help you with the diagnosis within minutes. But if you have to take that sample back to a lab somewhere, that clearly has no value at all. So you really need to have a point-of-care device to be able to do that. And we're doing this study with the RFU, which is actually looking at players that have been concussed, and actually these players are giving saliva and saliva samples immediately after the injury. So when a player is suspected with a concussion, they get removed for an assessment. So during their assessment, the player offers a sample of saliva, 2 mils of saliva, and then this player gets checked a number of times after the match, up to the return to play if you want, which could be sort of a week or 2 weeks later. So at each time point to get a sense, they give a sample of saliva, and also be using match controls, orthopedic controls, people that have had musculoskeletal injuries, and players that have actually played the game but not been injured at all as controls. So this is obviously is a massive effort. We're doing this with the RFU. The teams only have to complete a quick card, and then we do the rest of the work here in Birmingham. So the study was set up earlier this year. In August, we had the launch, and there was a media announcement that you may have seen, but actually it's gone out to, apparently it's been viewed by 100 million people around the world, from Brazil to New Zealand. So it's obviously something that has caught the attention of the media and the public. So we've actually done baseline on virtually every team in the Premiership and the Championship. So a huge number of samples. There's another team that's going to be baseline next week, and there's only one team that so far hasn't participated, but hopefully they'll come on board as well. So there have been 36 concussions in the Premiership and the Championship so far, and most of them have actually given samples to us. So the compliance rate is very, very good, which is exceptional for this type of study. So actually we're really encouraged by the level of participation and enthusiasm for this research. We're doing some analysis at the moment. We're trying to discover even more macroRNAs that may not even been identified yet. And then the study will complete at the end of the season, 2018, and then we'll report and publish the results. So obviously, we've only just started for the season, but so far, these things are going really well. So all that's left is for me to really thank a long list of co-investigators and people that with the study from the RFU and University of Bath and various collaborators. We have a lot of people working on this, but I have to say, it's not difficult to find students willing to help. Everybody's interested in this topic, and we're getting really a lot of enthusiasm all around the campus for this type of research. So thank you all very much for listening.